On the outskirts of Chicago, nestled between worn brick buildings and quiet streets, stood a small, modest café called The Corner. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when 5 strangers happened to gather within its faded walls, unaware that their paths were about to intertwine in ways they never imagined. Sarah, 25 years old, balanced trays of coffee cups, swiftly navigating between tables. Her dark skin, contrasted by her bright uniform, often drew more attention than she felt comfortable receiving. Across the room sat Robert, a 45-year-old white man, meticulously dressed in business attire. His piercing eyes studied Sarah's every movement, his expression stern, silently critical. Near the window, Diego, a 20-year-old construction worker of Latino heritage, had just finished his shift and was nursing his coffee, tired yet observant. He immediately sensed the tension emanating from Robert's direction, noticing how Sarah's cheerful demeanor faltered slightly whenever she passed by the man's table. In another corner, a young interracial couple, May, a 23-year-old Asian-American woman, and James, her 27-year-old African-American boyfriend, quietly exchanged glances. They'd witnessed scenarios like this before. Small, subtle displays of prejudice that often went unnoticed by others but were painfully clear to them. As Sarah approached Robert's table, offering her usual polite smile, Robert cleared his throat harshly. "I've been waiting 10 minutes, he stated coldly, his voice louder than necessary. "Is incompetence standard here, or is it just my lucky day?" Sarah's expression momentarily froze, her heartbeat quickening. She forced composure into her voice, replying carefully, "I'm sorry, sir. We're a little understaffed today." "I'll make sure," Robert interrupted abruptly, voice sharp and edged with disdain. "Maybe if you'd spend less time chatting and more time working, I wouldn't have this issue." Diego shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed. His eyes met those of May and James, who seemed equally uneasy. A quiet tension thickened the air of the cafe. Linda, the cafe manager, a 40-year-old white woman who typically avoided confrontation, paused in her duties behind the counter, her eyes uncertain. Her instinct was to smooth things over quickly, yet she hesitated, unsure of what step to take next. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding scene, each person quietly assessing their place in the escalating discomfort. None yet willing to intervene, but all clearly aware. This moment was about to ripple through their lives, changing everything. Robert's irritation visibly escalated as he stared impatiently at Sarah, his knuckles whitening around the handle of his coffee cup. He loudly placed the porcelain cup back onto its saucer, causing heads to turn. Sarah flinched slightly, her professional composure strained by the hostility. "I didn't come here to waste my afternoon dealing with this nonsense," Robert snapped, raising his voice deliberately. "Is there someone else who can do your job properly?" Sarah inhaled deeply, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady, determined not to let her dignity slip away. "I apologize, sir. If you'd prefer, I can ask someone else." "Don't bother," Robert interrupted again, his tone dripping with disdain. He glanced dismissively over her shoulder, visibly looking for another staff member. His gaze landed briefly on Linda behind the counter, who immediately looked away, clearly reluctant to become involved. Diego watched silently, the injustice churning uncomfortably inside him. He had witnessed similar scenes before, quietly observing from the sidelines. But something about this felt different. It struck a raw nerve. He felt compelled to speak up, though every instinct warned him about the risks. Finally, Diego pushed back his chair, the scraping sound loud enough to capture everyone's attention. He rose slowly, addressing Robert with cautious determination. "Hey man, she's just doing her job. No need to talk to her like that," Diego said, his voice firm but non-threatening. Robert's eyes narrowed instantly, scanning Diego from head to foot. His contempt became even more palpable. "And who exactly invited you into this conversation? Mind your own business," Robert retorted coldly. Diego felt his pulse quicken, frustration boiling up inside him. He maintained his stance, trying to appear calm. "I'm just saying, treat her with a little respect. She's working hard, just like everyone else." Robert's lips curled into a sneer. "Respect? That's funny coming from someone like you." He emphasized the phrase pointedly, his implication clear to everyone in the cafe. Diego's jaw tightened, heat rising in his chest. Around them, tension spread like an electric charge. Several customers lowered their gazes, pretending to focus elsewhere, uncomfortable yet unwilling to intervene. At their table near the corner, May gently squeezed James's hand. She whispered softly, "Should we do something? It doesn't feel right just sitting here." James, his eyes serious and thoughtful, nodded slowly. "I know. But you see how people are acting. If we say something, who knows how he'll react? His voice carried a tired recognition of a familiar pattern, one he had encountered too many times before. Nevertheless, May stood abruptly, propelled by a sudden resolve. "Excuse me," she spoke clearly, drawing surprised looks. "I think he's right. You don't have to speak to her like that." Robert twisted sharply in May's direction, momentarily stunned by the unexpected interference. His eyes flicked between May and James, quickly assessing the interracial couple, disdain evident in his expression. "Interesting," Robert muttered sarcastically, his voice loaded with subtle venom. "Now it's a full chorus of social justice warriors. How touching." Linda finally emerged from behind the counter, visibly nervous but trying to assert control. Her voice trembled slightly as she attempted to de-escalate the tension. "Please, everyone, let's just calm down. Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this quietly. Sarah, perhaps you could help another customer?" Robert immediately seized the opportunity, glaring triumphantly at Sarah. "Yes, please," he spat bitterly. "I've lost my appetite anyway." Sarah, feeling wounded but holding tightly to what remained of her dignity, nodded stiffly and stepped back, eyes cast downward, her shoulders rigid with suppressed anger and humiliation. Diego shook his head in disbelief, unable to conceal his disappointment at Linda's weak attempt at resolution. He sat back down slowly, fists clenched beneath the table. May, too, returned to her seat, troubled and conflicted. James softly touched her arm, silently supportive, understanding all too well the complexities of such situations. Robert stood abruptly, pulling his coat on with exaggerated annoyance. He shot one final glare towards Sarah, addressing Linda coldly. "You can expect a review about this. Next time, maybe train your employees better, or hire ones who understand basic manners." The cafe's bell chimed softly as Robert exited, but the heavy tension remained. The quiet aftermath was palpable, leaving each individual enveloped in discomfort. Linda hesitated briefly before retreating again behind her counter, visibly shaken, her usual ease now shattered by the conflict she had failed to manage. Sarah quickly turned away, retreating toward the kitchen, her pride stinging sharply from the encounter. Diego, still seated, stared blankly into his coffee, consumed by frustration and regret. He wondered if his intervention had only made things worse. May and James sat in silence, each lost in personal reflections. The uncomfortable reminder of how quickly prejudices surfaced, even in seemingly neutral spaces, weighed heavily upon them. The cafe gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, conversations slowly resuming, though noticeably hushed. Yet beneath the surface, the echoes of conflict lingered, leaving invisible marks on each of those involved. None of them knew yet how deeply this moment would affect their lives, nor the powerful ripple it was soon to create. In the days following the incident, its echoes lingered, permeating the lives of everyone involved. Though each had attempted to move forward, the confrontation at the cafe had planted seeds of doubt, pain, and reflection. Sarah found herself summoned by Linda into the cramped, dimly lit office at the back of the cafe. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, struggling to maintain eye contact. "Sarah, about the incident," she began hesitantly, twisting her fingers nervously. "Robert left a negative review online. He accused you of being disrespectful and hostile towards him." Sarah felt a surge of anger and disbelief tighten her chest. She clenched her jaw, choosing her words carefully. "You were there, Linda. You saw how he treated me. How could you think I was disrespectful?" Linda looked away, guilt etched clearly across her features. "I know," she admitted softly. "I saw. But he's a regular customer, and the owner read the review. They're concerned about our reputation." "So you're saying this is my fault?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly, revealing the hurt beneath her anger. "No," Linda quickly protested, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I'm not saying that. I'm just asking you to be more cautious in handling difficult customers. That's all." Sarah stared silently at her manager, feeling betrayed and isolated. She stood abruptly, forcing a quiet, strained politeness. "I'll do my best." Leaving the office, Sarah felt her stomach knot painfully. She was tired of always carrying the burden of others' prejudices, tired of being blamed simply for existing. Across town, Diego faced his own repercussions. Arriving at the construction site early as usual, he noticed the foreman, Jeff, approaching him, expression grim. "Diego," Jeff called, gesturing for him to step aside from the others. Diego complied, anxiety tightening around his heart. Jeff's face was unusually stern. Listen, Jeff began, uncomfortable but firm. We got a call yesterday. Someone claimed you'd been involved in an altercation at a cafe. They said you were aggressive. Company doesn't want troublemakers, Diego. Diego felt the ground beneath him shift. He opened his mouth to protest, but Jeff raised his hand, stopping him. I'm sorry, Jeff sighed. I know you're a good worker, but the decision's been made. We can't risk the complaints. You're off the crew. Diego's mind reeled. Words failed him as Jeff walked away, leaving him standing alone in the dust, the early morning sunlight suddenly harsh and unforgiving. He realized immediately that Robert had targeted him, ensuring consequences reached beyond the cafe. Elsewhere, in their small apartment, May and James struggled with the lingering discomfort that had shadowed them since that day. Sitting at their kitchen table, May nervously toyed with her mug, eyes fixed downwards. James, she whispered softly. I can't stop thinking about it. The way he looked at us, like we weren't supposed to be together. James reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. I know. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. But we can't let that get to us. May shook her head sadly, meeting his gaze with anxious sincerity. I thought we were past that, but maybe I was just naive. James sighed, nodding slowly. Sometimes I think so too, but that's exactly why we can't give up. We owe it to ourselves and to others who feel the same pressure. May squeezed his hand, grateful for his strength, yet feeling increasingly aware of the weight their relationship carried in a world that viewed their love through a distorted lens. Meanwhile, alone in his upscale apartment, Robert sat hunched over his laptop, anger and self-righteousness fueling his keystrokes. He had crafted his account of the incident meticulously, painting himself as a victim, unfairly targeted by aggressive and disrespectful individuals. The comments under his post swiftly piled up, some supportive, others skeptical, further fanning the flames. Satisfied, Robert leaned back, a smug smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Yet beneath his satisfaction lay an uncomfortable, unacknowledged doubt. He quickly pushed it aside, reassuring himself that he had done nothing wrong, that the others were merely too sensitive, unable to handle honest criticism. At the cafe, Linda found herself burdened by guilt. Each day since the conflict had brought her discomfort, shame gnawing relentlessly at her conscience. She recognized her own complicity. Her cowardice had enabled the injustice. Late one evening, alone after closing time, Linda scrolled through the growing online debate. Seeing Sarah's name repeatedly vilified, she felt an intense pang of regret. She knew the truth, yet had remained silent. Her hesitation had harmed someone who didn't deserve it, and now it haunted her deeply. Unable to sleep, Linda began composing an email. She addressed it carefully to Sarah, knowing words alone couldn't fully mend what had been broken, yet hoping they could start a path toward reconciliation. Sarah, I owe you an apology. My silence and inaction hurt you. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. I realize now how wrong I was, and I promise I'll find a way to make things right. Please forgive me. Linda. As she clicked send, relief mixed with anxiety flooded her heart. She understood clearly. The path toward justice and redemption was not easy, yet silence was no longer an option. In separate corners of the city, each person grappled with the impact of that single afternoon. They stood at crossroads, uncertain how their lives would continue to intersect. Unbeknownst to them, their stories had only begun to intertwine, leading them inevitably toward confrontation, and ultimately toward unity. Several days had passed, but the ripples of that day at the cafe continued to spread, each life slowly aligning toward a shared destiny. Late in the afternoon, under an overcast sky, Sarah stood at the bus stop, her thoughts heavy with worry and exhaustion. She had been searching for new employment all morning, but each rejection felt sharper than the last, leaving her drained and discouraged. Lost in her thoughts, she barely noticed the quiet footsteps approaching. Hey! A gentle voice called, pulling Sarah back to reality. Turning sharply, she recognized Diego, standing beside her, hands deep in his jacket pockets, his face filled with quiet understanding. Sarah managed a faint smile. Hi, she responded softly, slightly embarrassed by how vulnerable she must have appeared. Didn't expect to see you here. Same, Diego admitted quietly, shuffling his feet nervously. Been a rough week? Sarah sighed deeply, nodding slowly. Yeah, you could say that. Seems like every door I knock on gets slammed shut. Diego nodded sympathetically, his expression somber. Same here. Lost my job because of what happened. Robert made sure of it. Sarah felt immediate guilt, though Diego quickly shook his head, dismissing her unspoken apology. "It's not your fault," he reassured gently. "I chose to speak up. I don't regret it." A moment of quiet solidarity settled between them, the heavy silence punctuated only by distant traffic and occasional footsteps. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. "I never really got to thank you," she began hesitantly, meeting Diego's gaze. "For standing up for me, I mean. Not many people do that." Diego shrugged modestly, his smile faint but genuine. "It just felt like the right thing. But honestly, I keep wondering if it mattered at all." Sarah's eyes grew determined, meeting his with renewed clarity. "It mattered to me." He nodded quietly, visibly comforted by her words. For the first time in days, both felt a small measure of relief, realizing they weren't alone. As they talked, Sarah's phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. Glancing at the screen, she saw a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi Sarah, this is May, from the café. I hope it's okay I got your number from Linda. James and I wanted to talk. Can we meet?" Sarah quickly replied, heart quickening with curiosity and slight apprehension. Moments later, arrangements were set. A small park near downtown, later that evening. Diego offered to accompany her, sensing the importance of the moment. Together they headed towards their destination, a newfound sense of purpose binding them in quiet companionship. At the park, under the dim glow of lampposts, May and James were already waiting, expressions serious yet welcoming. May stepped forward first, her voice gentle and apologetic. "We're sorry to drag you out like this," she said softly. "But James and I can't shake what happened. We've been talking and realized we can't just let it go." James nodded firmly, addressing Diego directly. "What you did, standing up like that, it mattered more than you probably realize." Diego shifted awkwardly, uncertain how to respond. Sarah, sensing his discomfort, softly intervened. "We appreciate the support, but realistically, what can we actually do?" James exchanged a brief glance with May, clearly prepared for this question. "We've already contacted a local civil rights organization. They're interested in our case. They think there might be grounds to challenge Robert's claims publicly." Sarah's heart raced with conflicting emotions. "Publicly? Do we really want to reopen all of this?" May stepped forward again, her voice firm yet understanding. "It's already public, Sarah. Robert made sure of that. If we stay quiet, he controls the narrative. But we have a chance now to set things right." The weight of May's words resonated deeply, forcing Sarah to confront fears she'd carried for years. The fear of speaking out, of risking even more judgment. Yet standing there, surrounded by others who understood her struggle intimately, she felt something stronger emerge. Courage. Before Sarah could respond, another figure slowly approached the small group. It was Linda, walking hesitantly toward them, eyes cast downward in shame and anxiety. "I'm sorry I'm late," Linda began nervously, meeting Sarah's gaze cautiously. "I wasn't sure you'd even want me here." Sarah hesitated briefly, memories of Linda's inaction briefly clouding her thoughts. Yet seeing genuine remorse in Linda's eyes, she slowly nodded. "You came. That's something." Linda visibly relaxed, relieved. "I want to help. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I can testify. I can tell everyone what really happened." Her words settled heavily in the quiet air, each of them silently recognizing the courage in her vulnerability. James stepped forward, nodding firmly. "That's exactly what we need." For the next hour, the group talked earnestly, sharing their experiences, fears, and hopes. The initial discomfort gradually dissolved into mutual trust, forging bonds among strangers now united by adversity and resilience. When they finally parted, each felt profoundly changed. Sarah walked home alongside Diego, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Though uncertain about the future, she now had allies, people who had experienced similar struggles and who stood ready to support her. Diego glanced at Sarah thoughtfully, quietly observing the change in her demeanor. "You okay?" he asked gently. Sarah smiled softly, sincere relief shining through. "Yeah, I think for the first time in a long while, I actually am." In the quiet darkness, both understood clearly. Their lives had intersected not by mere chance, but through shared experiences of injustice. And now, together, they had a chance to fight back, to reclaim dignity, fairness, and respect from a world often unwilling to provide it. As each returned home that night, they knew clearly that their journeys had irrevocably joined, setting them toward a path none could navigate alone, a path toward justice and, ultimately, healing. In the weeks that followed, the group's decision to challenge the injustice publicly set into motion a whirlwind none of them fully anticipated. As the civil rights organization prepared its case, local media caught wind of the story, turning what initially had been an isolated incident at a small café into a citywide conversation about racism, discrimination, and social responsibility. The first report aired on local television, showcasing Robert's online accusations juxtaposed against testimonies from Sarah, Diego, May, James, and Linda. Linda's willingness to publicly acknowledge her initial failure became pivotal, giving the narrative authenticity and weight. Despite anxiety gnawing at her nerves, she stood resolute, determined to repair the damage her silence had once caused. Sarah, initially hesitant to speak openly, found herself in front of cameras more frequently than she'd ever imagined. Each retelling of her experience reopened wounds, yet also strengthened her voice. Her story resonated deeply, drawing both admiration and harsh criticism from the public. For every message of support Sarah received, a wave of anonymous hostility followed, filled with accusations and veiled threats. Yet despite the fear, Sarah felt an undeniable sense of purpose. She knew her voice had meaning and impact. Diego, too, faced mixed reactions. While some praised his courage, others accused him of playing victim, using stereotypes to further marginalize him. Still unemployed and facing daily struggles, Diego found solace in the camaraderie of the others, particularly in Sarah's quiet support. Together, they reminded each other why this fight was worth it. May and James quickly became focal points for discussions about interracial relationships. Their relationship, previously just private and ordinary, became subject to scrutiny, judgment, and even ridicule. Nevertheless, their determination remained unshaken. Each negative comment reinforced their conviction. To break barriers, they had to confront prejudice openly and bravely. Meanwhile, Robert found himself increasingly isolated. His confident facade began to crumble under scrutiny. Colleagues distanced themselves, fearful of association with the growing controversy. Initially defiant, Robert soon realized the tide of public opinion was turning against him, as evidence surfaced revealing inconsistencies and clear prejudices in his statements. Social media, once his ally, now turned mercilessly critical. One evening, Linda approached Sarah cautiously after closing the café, her eyes tired but determined. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told anyone," she confessed hesitantly. Sarah paused, immediately sensing the importance of this conversation. Linda continued, her voice steady but filled with regret. "Robert called me after that day, threatening to damage the café's reputation if I sided with you. He warned me against supporting you publicly. I was terrified, Sarah. That's partly why I hesitated so long. I'm sorry." Sarah absorbed Linda's confession silently, recognizing the courage it took for her to admit this now. "Thank you for telling me," Sarah finally replied gently, sincerity evident in her voice. "It means a lot, and I forgive you." Relief visibly softened Linda's tense posture, solidifying the bond they had slowly rebuilt. Sarah knew forgiveness was not only for Linda, but also for herself, releasing her from the weight of bitterness and resentment she'd carried too long. As news coverage expanded, the civil rights organization organized a community town hall to discuss the broader implications of the incident. Sarah, Diego, May, James, and Linda agreed to speak. Understanding this event symbolized more than their personal struggle. It represented collective pain and hope for their community. On the night of the town hall, the community center overflowed with people, the air heavy with anticipation. Seated on stage, facing an anxious, diverse audience, each of them realized the magnitude of their decision. This gathering was a chance to confront prejudice openly, demanding accountability and change. Sarah stepped up first, her voice initially trembling but gaining strength with each word spoken. "What happened to me wasn't isolated. It happens every day, quietly, unnoticed. Our silence allows prejudice to continue unchallenged. We need courage to break the silence." Diego spoke next, openly addressing his fear and vulnerability. "Standing up cost me my job. Speaking out now isn't easy. But silence isn't an option anymore. If we don't confront these issues together, nothing changes." May and James addressed the subtle prejudices they'd endured as an interracial couple. "We often tell ourselves we've moved past these things," James began solemnly. "But incidents like this remind us of the work still left to do." Linda stepped forward last, acknowledging her complicity frankly and clearly. "I was afraid of controversy, afraid of consequences. But silence and fear make us accomplices. We must support each other courageously, even when it's uncomfortable." The room erupted in applause, mixed with scattered murmurs of disagreement. The subsequent dialogue was raw, honest, at times uncomfortable, but necessary. The event didn't magically resolve deep-seated issues, yet it sparked critical reflection within the community, generating conversations previously avoided. Following the event, Robert faced mounting public pressure. Eventually, cornered by undeniable truths and exhausted by constant scrutiny, he issued a reluctant public apology. Though tinged with defensiveness, it marked a significant moment of accountability. For Sarah and the others, it wasn't about vindictiveness but rather acknowledgement and justice. That evening, gathered again privately in the quiet café, the five reflected on their journey. Sarah spoke first, gratitude clear in her voice. "None of us imagined we'd end up here, but I'm glad we stood together." Diego smiled softly, nodding. "Maybe this won't change everything immediately, but we've taken a crucial step." James gently squeezed May's hand. "And we didn't do it alone." Linda, now more confident in her role as an ally, voiced a cautious optimism. "We've started something important, and though it's hard, I believe real change comes from exactly these difficult moments." In quiet agreement, the group sat briefly, absorbing the reality that their courage had meaning far beyond personal battles. Outside, city lights glowed softly, a symbol of resilience against darkness. Inside the café, unity formed a shield against prejudice and despair. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, each felt truly prepared to face whatever came next. Not alone, but together, stronger and wiser for all they'd endured. Months passed since the town hall had shaken the community awake, and slowly, life began settling into a new rhythm for everyone involved. The initial spotlight had faded, yet its afterglow lingered, subtly influencing every aspect of their lives. Sarah had found new employment with the civil rights organization, her role involving community outreach and advocacy. Each day brought her face to face with new stories of discrimination, resilience, and hope. Despite the exhausting emotional labor, Sarah felt deeply fulfilled, recognizing her own struggle reflected in those she helped. On one particularly cold evening, she sat in a quiet coffee shop, preparing notes for a meeting when Diego walked in, bundled in a heavy jacket, a warm smile spreading across his face when he saw her. "Long day?" he asked gently, pulling out a chair opposite her. Sarah nodded with a soft sigh, closing her laptop to give him full attention. "Busy, but rewarding. What about you?" "Good," Diego replied enthusiastically. "I just got hired permanently at the community center. I'm helping organize job training programs for immigrants and marginalized groups." Sarah's eyes sparkled with pride. "Diego, that's amazing." He smiled warmly, a hint of humility evident. "I learned from the best. Watching you inspired me. I wanted to do something meaningful." Sarah's heart warmed at his words, recognizing the quiet bond that had grown stronger between them through shared trials. Both knew clearly how far they'd come since the cafe incident, their friendship forged in adversity and strengthened by compassion. Across town, May and James had also taken significant steps forward. After confronting the public scrutiny of their relationship, they became advocates for racial awareness, conducting workshops and community dialogues focused on tolerance and understanding. What had initially frightened them, the harsh glare of public attention, had transformed into a powerful platform for positive change. One afternoon, standing before a group of college students, James spoke openly. "It's easy to believe we've moved past prejudice until we experience it firsthand. What matters most is recognizing it and choosing courage over silence." May stood beside him, nodding gently. "We learned that staying silent only feeds prejudice. Real change demands active, continuous dialogue." Afterwards, students approached them, eager to share personal experiences and thank them for speaking up. In those moments, May and James felt profoundly validated, seeing the tangible impact of their vulnerability and courage. Linda, too, had made profound changes. The cafe had become known as a safe space for honest conversations about race and prejudice, hosting monthly community discussions. At first uncertain and anxious, Linda had steadily grown more confident, fully embracing her responsibility as an ally. One evening, after another successful community forum, Linda and Sarah lingered after everyone else had left. Linda hesitated slightly before speaking. "Sarah, I never thought I'd thank anyone for confronting my mistakes, but you've taught me so much. You made me understand my privilege, something I'd never faced before." Sarah smiled kindly, touched by Linda's honesty. "You chose to listen. Not everyone does. That's huge." Linda nodded earnestly, sincerity filling her voice. "I'll keep listening and speaking up." Meanwhile, Robert found his life permanently altered by events he himself had triggered. His forced public apology had done little to restore his reputation. Still employed but isolated professionally, he grappled daily with the uncomfortable realization that he had become exactly what he'd always denied being, the perpetrator of injustice. On a rainy evening, Robert sat alone in his apartment, the news quietly murmuring in the background. Suddenly, Sarah's face appeared on screen, passionately speaking at another community event. Her words resonated deeply, even though he fought against admitting it. A profound discomfort filled him, an undeniable truth he'd been resisting for months. He'd been wrong, driven by prejudice, arrogance, and ignorance. Finally, Robert turned off the television, enveloped by silence, confronting honestly, for perhaps the first time, the consequences of his actions. Though painful, it was a crucial step toward genuine understanding. Eventually, nearly a year after that fateful day, the group found themselves again at the café. Once the scene of conflict, now a symbol of healing. Gathered informally around a large wooden table, laughter and conversation flowed naturally, ease born of shared experiences and mutual respect. Diego looked around the table, his voice reflective. "It's strange, isn't it? A year ago, none of us knew each other. Now, here we are. Changed." James nodded thoughtfully, his arm around May's shoulder. "Changed, and still changing. That's the most important part." Sarah spoke softly, sincere gratitude clear in her eyes. "I wouldn't wish what happened on anyone. But without it, we might never have met. Maybe it had to happen this way, for us to grow." The table grew quiet, each person silently acknowledging the profound truth in her words. Linda gently broke the silence. "We started as strangers, full of biases we didn't fully see. But our stories crossed paths for a reason. We chose to listen. And I think that's the key." Outside, night had fallen fully, the streets softly glowing under lamplight. Around them, the cafe buzzed gently with conversations, the warmth a comforting backdrop to their reflective moment. Sarah spoke once more, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "This is why we keep fighting, because sometimes real change comes through painful intersections. If even one person listens, it matters." As they eventually parted ways, each understood clearly that their journey was not over, yet something fundamental had shifted. Their lives had become permanently entwined, teaching them profound lessons about humanity, courage, and compassion. Sarah stepped out into the cool night air, Diego walking beside her. She paused briefly, looking up at the stars visible despite the city lights, sensing clearly the strength in their shared experiences. "Strange how life works," Diego murmured quietly, following her gaze. Sarah smiled, nodding softly. "Strange, but hopeful." Together they continued down the street, each step filled with purpose and promise. Behind them, lights flickered gently inside the cafe, symbolizing a beacon of progress amid uncertainty. Life had forced these strangers together through adversity, discrimination, and conflict. But in confronting pain openly, they'd forged connections powerful enough to inspire genuine change. Though prejudice and inequality persisted, they now knew clearly, together, they could confront it. Their paths had intersected precisely where they were meant to, at the crossroads of courage, understanding, and solidarity.